A few years ago, God led us to stay at this really cheap extended stay hotel. And it was really gross, to be honest. The furnishings were filthy and old, and there was a terrible odor in the place. The whole ambiance of it was that of pain, suffering, poverty. The floors were disgusting. The carpet was sticky. When you would walk, it felt like you were walking on tape. So we always, of course, wore socks inside. It was tiny. There was only a little bit of space for us. And it was painful because even as cheap as it was to pay for, I still barely got by with paying for food and my bills and my other needs. And while we were there, God kept talking to me, giving me promises that he was going to take us to this castle apartment that was in the next town away that had these glorious big apartments with 3 bedrooms. Most of them were 3 or 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, washer and dryer, a library that looked like Beauty and the Beast from Disney. It was like a Cinderella dream. There was actually a Cinderella carriage there that I've shared pictures with before. And he was giving me these promises, and he kept telling me, you have an abundance, you have wealth. But all I could see in the natural was poverty, pain, hunger, suffering. I would be sick to my stomach every time I'd go into that hotel because of the smell. But everything that God was promising me was the opposite of what I was seeing. I could barely get together the money to survive. I had, barely 2 pennies to rub together. I remember one night in a storm, I parked in a store parking lot and just wept with deep anguish because I couldn't stand the pain of it. Because for me, it's never about having money. It's never about so much the abundance. It's about freedom. And poverty is like, it's a prison. It's a curse. It's what it is. And God was showing me these promises of blessings, blessings, blessing. Kept telling me he was taking us to the castle. And it was almost time to either extend our reservation at that really gross hotel, or to see if God would finally move us. And when God kept telling me over and over and over, he kept giving me signs of this castle, and I couldn't really believe. I felt like Sarah, because I would laugh and be like, okay, sure, whatever you say. That's not at all what I'm seeing. I don't see any possible way. My faith was in a severe challenge because it was a contrast of day and night. What God said and what I saw were 2 very different things. And I was just praying, and I was trying so hard to believe, but when you're being pressed on all sides, staying in a place of restful belief is probably the hardest thing you'll ever do in your life. It's like a complete death to fear and doubt and unbelief. And for me, it was like peeling away layers of onions, and I'm still going through it. God's peeled away so many layers of that unbelief and doubt and fear. But there's still more that he helps me through. So right before it was time to check out, all of a sudden I had this idea that came out of nowhere of something I could try. And it ended up working. And within 5 minutes, I went from $5 to $5,000. And God told me, book a month at the castle. It took several $1,000s to pay for a month there in the off season. And the summer's even more ridiculous because it was through an Airbnb type rental, a month to month or however long. And so I did it. And when we went in there, we were all in tears of so much happiness and gratitude. There was a full kitchen and beautiful beds, and the furniture was clean, and there was no bad smell. And it was so comforting, and it felt so incredibly good. And then for 3 years, not only did God open a door and bring us where he said he was going to, but for 3 years, he kept us there. And we lived like princesses in a castle. And God blessed us, because before that, we had went through some really low, painful times. And it was a lot like the discomfort that I went through was a lot like a mom bird, nudging the baby out of the nest, making it uncomfortable for the baby so that the baby will want to get out of that nest. Because when we're comfortable, we don't move. And long before I started this journey, God told me I had to do it this way or you would have never went. And he had to make me uncomfortable in order to push me and to fly into what he called me to do. So sometimes the mother bird will even push the baby all the way out the nest and make her fall, and she has to figure out how to use her wings on the way down. And that's what happened to me when I took my kids to the hotel with just the money that God promised. We stayed, this is my recent update, we stayed 6 nights in that fancy, glittery downtown Chicago hotel. But then there was more that God needed to do with me. And so he brought us back out to the suburbs and gave us a blessing of 12 nights paid for in a very, very low, grimy hotel, kind of like the one I just explained to you. And we just got into it today, and it was like going back in time. And it brought instant confusion, because everything that I'm seeing was like opposite of everything God's been recently promising me for the last month. Over and over, he has made specific promises of where he's taking us. And this is as far from that as you could be. And so God started showing me that he's, again, making me uncomfortable to push me into the position that he has for me. Because between me and you, I've been really resistant to do what God's called me to do. I always talk about, complete surrender and total trust. But if I could be honest with you, I haven't surrendered. Not at all. I've survived. God has rescued me. I've learned. I've shed away a lot of layers of weight of, the unbelief, the fear, all that spiritual obesity that doesn't come off unless it's put into motion. And just recently, going through all of this drastic change and all these faith testings, it brought out things that I didn't realize that were there, but I had been resisting God on being who he called me to be and doing what he called me to do and believing his promise. When God called me to start doing YouTube, I was like, nope, not doing it. No way. Because that's uncomfortable. And when he told me to start opening up comments, I'm like, nope, not doing it. No way. And I was resistant because it was uncomfortable. When I was a young mom, My dream was to be a nurse and to help deliver babies. That was my dream, my adult dream. And a lot of things happened. I've talked about before that there were reasons that I couldn't work for situations that happened to someone else that's close to me and situations that happened in my life. And I was angry, and I held all this resentment and anger and pain. And recently God took me back and he said, yes, that was your dream as an adult. But let's go back to when you were a child, with childlike faith, when you used to go out in the woods and give birthday parties to the trees and sing to the birds like Snow White. And I used to spend from the time the sun would rise to the sun would go down. I spent the whole day outside doing flips and cheers. I wanted to be like a cheerleader, and I had all these dreams. But my childhood dream is the very thing that God's been leading me to do. But I've been resistant, and I've been wrestling with him, and I've been fighting him. Like this bird that's like, no, I am not getting out of this nest. You're going to have to throw me out. I'm not moving, no. Because I was afraid of what I would have to face to become who God called me to be. And so that disalignment, God had to make me uncomfortable to start pushing me in. So he sent me on this journey. He had me start sharing these love letters. He had me start activating my faith to believe in his promises and to grow a deep, intimate bond with him, to where his voice is the one I will only follow. And I had to have him rescue me over and over and over and fulfill his promises over and over and over. And even as many promises as he's fulfilled for me, I still wrestle with like unbelief and fear and doubt. And recently God's been telling me that he's taking all of that out through what I'm stepping into now. And that the discomfort is only to push me into flying into all that he's called me to be and all that he's promised. Because we can't move into the new when we're holding on to the old. And I was holding on to the idea of what I thought I wanted, the anger, the resentment, the blame. I was mad at the circumstances and the people that forced me to have to go through this journey. I resented the journey, and I didn't really surrender to what God had called me to do. I didn't want to live this way. I didn't want to have to share myself so vulnerably and openly to total strangers. I didn't want to write a book. I wanted to be an author. I've wanted that forever. But I didn't want to share the chambers of my heart, especially with those that haven't went through any healing or any deliverance, so that's still the ugliness on the outside that you see. And we all have levels of that, and sometimes the discomfort or the trials that we go through are allowed to push us out of the nest, because if we didn't get uncomfortable, we'd never fly into the very best. We would never fly into the promises of God. We'd never fly into our destined calling, into the person that God created us to be, into our gifts, into our talents. And so I'm in this place now where I'm starting to lay down all that heavy weight I've been carrying all these years, so I can spread my wings and fly into what God's promised. I'm into a place of repentance where I'm turning around from what I wanted to what God wanted me to do. And then the funny thing is when I look back and I see what God is calling me to do, and what God is asking me to do in the promised ending He's made for me, every single one of them things go back to my childhood dream. Before I was abused, before I knew suffering, before I knew the deceit and bitterness of man, before I knew all the hurtful ways that the world can be, back when I was just in that place of purity and it was just me and Papa God out in the forest singing to birds and dreaming all day I would dream. And I'd imagine all the things I could be. And that's the place where God is taking me. And so it's time to shed away those things that keep us from flying, those things that we resist, those things that have our wings clipped. The discomfort, my beloved, is not to punish you. It's to help you find your way. It's to push you out of the nest to fly into all that God called you to be. And before you can fly, you have to give up all those things that weigh you down. You have to let go of everything that you are holding on to that's not matching where you're going. It means letting go of those fears, the distrust in God to show up. We all say we have faith until it comes down to a life or death situation or a very difficult trial where we're faced with the complete opposite of what we were promised. It's in that darkness that the light glows. It's in that darkness that the stars of promise shine and fill everything with beauty. It's going to look opposite. If you're going through something right now that looks completely opposite of what you promised or what you were promised by God or these love letters or what you dream to be, then you're right there because it comes out in the dark like stars. It happens at a time when you don't think it will because everything looks so opposite. In the valley of trouble, the door of hope is opened. And for some of us, we are out of time. There's no more time to resist getting out of that nest. There's no more time to hold on to things such as resentment or anger or pain or the past, the memories, the disappointments, the doubts, the fears. We got to let it go so we can fly into our most authentic, true self, our true calling, that beautiful thing that you were made to do. You were destined for greatness and for big, wonderful things. And most of us are not even close to doing what that is, the fullness of it. So if you're in a place where it feels like you're in turbulence, you're in discomfort, you're going through some hard things, that's just the nest shaken, because you're about to fly and you're about to soar, mount up on eagle's wings into the most beautiful dream. We connect back to our childhood dreams and we become everything that God put inside of us, those precious jewels. So just know that the discomfort is a sign that change is here and that you're about to fly. When you go low, it's only because you're about to rise. A wave goes low before it rises up. So don't see the low times as a bad thing, but see them as that moment right before the big wave rises up with turquoise glittering water. and takes you into those things that God promised you. I love you so much, and I thank you for listening to me. And for those of you who have been so loving and encouraging, just know how much I appreciate you. God bless you. This is Dannette from diamondsfromthedust.com. And I also have my new store at DannetteWard.com. And there's all kinds of treasures there too, if you want to see. Thank you.